Good evening and welcome to the fourth and final presentation of Underwood Conservation District's Winter Workshop Series. I don't think we're in winter anymore. My name is Tova Tillinghast and I'm the Underwood Conservation District Manager. Thank you all for taking time to be with us here. Tonight we'll explore the path towards succession planning and what it takes for families to be prepared for the unexpected or expected tasks involved in ensuring a smooth generational transition for the land. Farmland succession planning is a critical step for any family managing acreage. And Kate Delavan with the Office of Farmland Preservation will provide several resources for succession planning so that landowners and families can accomplish their goals on the land despite some of the transitions that are inevitable in life. We'll also have a dynamic panel discussion for the latter half of tonight's event with 3 additional experts sharing their knowledge and helping answer your specific questions. All right, just briefly, I want to mention our winter workshop series. Back in December, we learned about backyard conservation, living with wildlife, and how to participate in our brand new Yard by Yard program, which you can find on the UCD webpage. In January, we had a fascinating presentation about beavers and a dynamic discussion about how to live peacefully with beavers and support watershed health. And in February, we heard from a group called Forest Carbon Works about opportunities for forest landowners to access the carbon market. All of our workshops, including last year's, have been recorded and are available to view on our website. You look under news and events to find those. And we've also assembled the slides as a PDF slide deck for future reference. So if you know someone who should have attended tonight's workshop but couldn't make it, please send them to our website in the next week or so and they can find this workshop recording and the slide deck. Finally, you can hear all of the most recent news and updates from us by signing up for the UCD e-newsletter on our website. So stay in the loop by doing that. Now, I will turn to Jan Thomas. She's a resource specialist at UCD and she's going to be our moderator tonight. She has a few logistics just to get us started.
Yeah, thanks Tova, and thanks everyone for being here tonight. I think we're all old pros at Zoom by now, but in case you are like my husband and managed to escape the last 2 years without a Zoom meeting, I'll just run over the basics here with you. Please keep yourself on mute during the presentation. You're all able to unmute yourselves, so we're trusting you to keep on mute, and otherwise I'll have to get you from the background here. When we go into our questions and answers period, which we'll have 2 of those tonight, one after Kate Delavan's presentation for kind of questions specific to her presentation, and then of course when we go into our panel discussion, we definitely welcome your questions and comments, and you can provide those by either typing into the chat box, which you'll find an icon down at the bottom of your screen, or especially with a small group tonight, we definitely just, you know, raise your hand or unmute yourself and have just a kind of a back and forth conversation style would be great as well. So either of those options, but please do keep yourself on mute unless it's your turn to speak. You have probably experienced, if you have been Zooming for the last 2 years, that occasionally all of the audio just cuts out on you. And really the best thing to do there is just to log out and log back in. You can also call in with your telephone though if it's giving you more trouble, and you'll find those phone numbers in your registration email along with the link that you zoomed in here tonight on those. And as Tova mentioned, we are recording tonight, and I will get this recording and the presentation materials posted by next week. I'm hopeful for next week. So you'll find those there for anybody that needs them, or if you just want to revisit it yourself. We are going to have a poll here at the beginning of our evening, and then one at the end too. That'll just pop right up on your screen and you can answer the poll. I'll share a summary results, but your individual results are anonymous, so feel free to be honest there. I think that's everything I have. If you're having any trouble with anything, just pop it into the chat box and I can try to troubleshoot with you on the side. I'll turn it back to you, Tova.
All right, thank you, Jan. Okay, we are finding that this online approach to our workshops has worked pretty well over the course of the last 2 years. And of course, we miss seeing everyone face to face, but hopefully you're comfortable at home, putting your feet up with your favorite beverage in hand. And we're also excited to see that we can reach folks from all ends of our district, from the west end of Skamania County to the eastern side of Klickitat County even, and all over the state. So we appreciate that broader outreach effect of Zoom. So thanks for hanging in there with us. We would love to know more about you in our audience. And so we are going to put up that first poll now really quickly, just to understand a bit more about who you all are.
Give folks a couple more seconds here. Don't be shy. Everyone can answer. Step right up.
There's no wrong answers in this poll.
All right, and I'll share the results here. For some reason, Tova isn't often able to see them. Tova, can you see it this time?
I still don't see it.
I'll briefly just say what we've got here. Then looks like we've got probably most of the people from Klickitat County, and then a couple of somewhere else in Washington. About half and half for farm landowner or land manager. And then looks like we've got 3 folks on here that have 100 acres or more to manage, and then the rest either just a couple or in that 5 to 40 range. And pretty good across the board with how many are familiar with farmland succession planning. So all the way from never heard of it to very familiar. And then for the top concerns in farmland succession, it's also pretty evenly distributed. Protecting natural resources was the highest, and then keeping land and agriculture and protecting the family's assets were also top choices, although there were some choices for all of those. So
yeah,
hopefully that gives us a bit of an idea who we've got here.
Thanks, Jan. All right, thanks everybody. Okay, so now just to get you oriented to us a little bit, I'm going to run through just a couple slides about what we do at Underwood Conservation District. We are a local resource for natural resource management. And again, we serve in Skamania County and West Klickitat counties. And you can see the variety of different programs that we have on the screen here. Things vary based on funding and the grant sources that we have access to at the time, but we really do cover a broad spectrum of natural resource issues here at Underwood Conservation District. This is our district area. It's quite a large area. And as you know, there's quite a bit of federal lands and even state lands within this district area. So we are not focused on those public lands. We really do focus more on the private lands with our work. And then in terms of just a few local farmland resources, again, at Underwood Conservation District, we do provide on-site technical assistance and advice. We have cost share funding for certain projects. You can see the list of different varieties of projects and work that we do with farm landowners. One thing that we're really excited about this spring is our new farm tool library. And I can tell you more about that if you reach out to me later. But that's opening this spring. And we even have a dream of a future incubator farm. So we've been slowly developing that vision and thinking about how that could take place here in this area. But I want to mention that there are some other resources as well besides just ourselves. Gorge Grown is here tonight, represented by Sarah Sullivan. We have WSU Extension based out of Stevenson and Goldendale. And then there's also the federal partner of ours. They're the Natural Resource Conservation Service located in Goldendale and Vancouver. And there's many other groups, including the Washington Farmland Trust and Kate here with the Office of Farmland Preservation. So there's a lot of folks to be aware of in the area. And if we don't have the answers here locally, we'll help point you in the right direction for whatever your questions may be. So with that, I just want to get started with our main event tonight. We have Kate Delavan here, and she leads the Office of Farmland Preservation at the Washington State Conservation Commission. Kate brings a broad understanding of food systems and conservation to her work, with diverse experience including conservation transactions and policy, conservation funding, land use planning, farmers markets, and food assistance programs. Kate holds a BS in global business from the University of Redlands and an MPA from the University of Washington. Tonight, Kate will provide an overview of tools, resources, and support for landowners to plan for succession and long-term farmland protection. So I will hand the baton off to Kate now.
Thanks, Tova, and thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to be with you all tonight. I'll just pull up my presentation. You should now be seeing my slides, and it should be in the correct mode. Can I get a thumbs up from Tova? A head nod. Great, thank you. So I'll dive right in. I'm Kate Delavan, as you just heard, with the Office of Farmland Preservation at the Washington State Conservation Commission. The Washington State Conservation Commission is a state agency that works to conserve soil, water, and other natural resources. We do this by working with private landowners, natural resource agencies, and conservation districts. And all of our programs are voluntary and non-regulatory. So we're a non-regulatory agency. And the Office of Farmland Preservation was created by the state legislature back in 2007. It's a program located within the Conservation Commission. And we're working to address the rapid loss of working farmland in Washington state. So just to kind of get us oriented, I wanted to share a little bit of data on farmland lost in Washington. We recently commissioned researchers at the University of Washington to do an assessment of what's happening to farmland in Washington between the time period 2007 to 2019. And this is a little bit different than some of the other data that's out there that looks specifically the ag census is what we usually look to, that the USDA does every 5 years. This looked at the county level, at the parcel level, is land in agriculture or not over this period. And what we found was that as of 2019, there were 92,000 different landowners of agricultural land in Washington. That represents 12.4 million acres of agricultural land, and 6.7 of which are cultivated land. Since 2007, just under 300,000 acres of agricultural land has been converted to other land uses. I looked specifically within Klickitat County and Skamania County for you all tonight. And Klickitat County has about 520,000 acres in farming in 2019 and lost about 7,300 acres over this time period. Skamania County is one of the few positives in the state in that they gained 23 acres between 2007 and 2019. And they're sitting at around 1,500 acres in farming. And as you all know, There's a lot of federal land in Skamania County, and I'll show some slides on where the agricultural land is located. On the right side of this screen, in red, you see that Puget Sound has lost 60% of its farmland since 1950, and that's a data point from the USDA agricultural census that I mentioned earlier. At the bottom of the slide, if you're interested in digging more into data, you can follow the link at the bottom of the slide to pull up the Washington State Ag Land Database developed by those researchers at the University of Washington. So that is available to you. And then here is Skamania County. So here's gaining the 23 acres. As you can see, it's really the southern end of the county that has land in agriculture. The parcels that are in agriculture are shown here in the tan color. If they were converted to ag, they show up in green. And if they are taken out of agriculture, they show up in red. Klickitat County has a lot more red and a lot more tan, of course, and then some green dispersed in there. So you can see Klickitat County lost about 7,300 acres in this time period. So you might be wondering or might be thinking what impacts the loss of farms, and probably some of the folks on this call can think of other reasons, but typically we kind of look at these main reasons on this slide. So we think about market opportunities. Is the farm profitable? If a farm can't continue to make money, can't stay in business, it's likely to be sold for another use. We also think about resource availability, and that's land, water, and soil. And this really relates to land availability and development pressure. There's a lot of pressure on our agricultural land to be converted to other uses. That increased competition results in higher land prices, which then further prices out farmers and kind of creates this cycle, which relates to the third bullet, which is land access. So affordability and opportunity. Are folks able to start farm businesses? Are they able to get on the land? And then I'll share some more information about this last one. And this is not unique to Washington State. We're seeing this across the country. It's an aging farmer population and the lack of a successor. And I should have said this at the outset, but when I talk about farms, I think a lot of this is also applicable to forest landowners. So you can kind of mentally just substitute farm for forest if that is what's happening for you. So the aging farmer population in Washington State, this is that USDA Ag Census data. And what it tells us is that the average age of farmers in Washington is 57 years old as of 2017. That's the latest data. And what this chart tells you is that we are seeing more and more farmers in the older age brackets, so 55 and above, than farmers in the younger age brackets. So that means we have more farmers retiring, either looking to transition their operations, and they may not have that next farmer lined up, and there's fewer folks to choose from there. So this data shows 2007 is in blue, 2012 is in orange, and 2017 is in gray. So what we expect, given this demographic trend, is that in the next 10 years, 20 years, we're going to see a lot of land transition in Washington State. And when we think about, well, what does that really look like? There's some key challenges that we know farmers and forest landowners face. So USDA did some research into this back in 2005 and found that 63% of farmers waited until they were 65 or older to identify a successor. They also found that 58% of farm owners list inadequate succession planning as the biggest problem facing their business. And then this last data point is pretty startling. Only 1% of family-owned farms are transferred to a third generation. And so that tells us that farmers are waiting to identify a successor or struggling to identify a successor. They're really worried about succession planning, and that many farms don't make it onto the third generation. So then a little bit more positive, when is the time to start planning? And it's really now, never is too, it's never too early to start planning. Unfortunately, too often planning starts the day after the funeral. And I don't say any of this lightly. I know these are big issues for farm families. And it's important to note that if a decision is postponed until after the loss of a loved one, it can make the resulting decisions you have to make that much more difficult. So it can cause strain between family members, and it may be too late to be strategic about business entity and tax planning, and it makes it less likely the next generation will succeed. Fortunately, we have some resources to help you on this journey. It may seem like a daunting task. We have developed a workbook to hopefully make it more approachable for you. So the workbook is called the Planning the Future of Your Farm. And oh, great. I see that Jan just put the link in the chat, so you can go ahead and check it out. Planning the Future of Your Farm. It is a free workbook. It's an absolutely free resource. It's available in English and in Spanish. And I'm going to now take some time to walk you through what's in this workbook. So there are 4 sections. The first section is developing a vision for the future. It's going to have you walk through a set of questions that you should be considering. Questions for you, for your family members, and if you have a business partner, to help you identify what you want and what it is you're really working towards. There's resources about how to plan family meetings, and then there's considerations for identifying and managing risks. The second section is all about evaluating your farm resources, and it includes things like looking at the property ownership structure and how that might impact your succession planning. It also has an assessment of the natural resources on the farm, the human resources on the farm, so that might be you, your family members, any employees, anyone that's on your team that's helping run your business, and then financial assessments. The third section is all about farm transfer tools. So there's an overview of some basic estate planning documents like wills, trusts, and gifts. There's a section on entity and farm transfer planning. And then there's a section on buy-sell agreements and developing lease agreements. So that can be really helpful if you have an identified successor, or if you have someone that's looking to lease your land. There's some language there. And then there's also a section on conservation easements. Section 4 is all about meeting with professional advisors. So who should you have on your team? How to prepare to meet with them. So what should you be prepared to talk about? And then what critical documents should you either have ready or be prepared to have? And then there's a glossary, which I think can be really helpful for many of us. This is a brand new topic, and there may be some unfamiliar terminology, and the glossary is handy there. And then lastly, interspersed throughout the workbook, there are many worksheets. These worksheets are designed to be approachable, simple in form, and to really help you start to think about some of these big questions. So as I was saying earlier, the workbook is really designed to help you on that first step in this process. So you can start to formulate your thinking, what your goals are, and then what you need to do to get there. Nothing in this workbook should be construed as financial or legal advice. It's an educational and informational tool, and it's just a starting place, but it definitely doesn't take the place of planning with your own team of professional advisors. Now I'll run through some of the highlights of the workbook. So the intended audience is families who want to keep their farmland or forest land in production or in the family as it passes to the next generation. So that might be to a family member, that might be to an employee. And really the workbook highlights that successful transfer of farm businesses and land requires understanding and stating your goals. Oftentimes that's the hardest part. Assessing the value of your assets and wealth, understanding the goals and challenges of family members or business partners. And then it also requires a team of professional advisors. The workbook defines farm transfer planning as a process of decision-making that protects your land's agricultural and forest production while preserving family relationships and enhancing community development. So you'll see in the workbook, if you take a look at it, that there's a lot in there about how to talk to family members, because we recognize that this is a topic that can sometimes tear families apart. It can be a major challenge for families. So there's a lot of focus on preserving those relationships and really helping you get where you're trying to go. And then it's also really, at the end of the day, about supporting better decision-making and reducing risk. So I mentioned some key questions just to get you kind of thinking. I've added in here some of the key questions in the workbook. There are many more, but one place to start is, what do you want to see happen to your farm or forest land? As we saw in the poll earlier, oftentimes there's many key issues for you. So it might be about keeping family harmony, might be about passing on a farming tradition, retaining hard-earned wealth for heirs, or limiting your tax liability, or other reasons, or some combination of these reasons. But naming that up front will help you tremendously as you start down this path. Another key question is, what do you want retirement to look like? Where will you live, and what type of income will you need to support that? Then there's some questions around what risks might come up for you to your vision. And the workbook refers to it as the 5 Ds, which is actually more than 5, but they're grouped together. So it's death, disease and disability, disaster and debt, divorce, disagreement, and disengagement. So again, none of those are pleasant things to think about, but if you think about them now, you're able to minimize your risk and hopefully make better decisions, or be prepared to deal with these things when they come up. So another key question is, who will farm the land when you're no longer farming it, or who will manage it when you're no longer managing it? And then follow-up questions are they prepared to take over? Do they have the skills and the resources and the desire? And if not, what might it take to get them there? And then what about other family members? You may have family members or employees who are interested in continuing to see the farm in operation, and others who aren't. And how are you going to deal with that? And one, I think, really key issue the workbook highlights is the difference between fair and equal. So as we think about dividing assets and farm succession planning, often families start from a place of wanting to be equal. So equal is the equal distribution of dollar value. So one easy way to think of this is, if I have, say, for example, a 50-acre farm, and I have 5 children, equal would be to split it up into 10-acre parcels and give one 10-acre parcel to each of my children. But that may not actually be fair overall, because each of those children may have different abilities to keep that land in production. And if ultimately my goal is to see the farm legacy continue and to see the farm business continue and support family members in the future, a 10-acre farm, depending on the type of operation, may not be as viable as that standalone 50-acre farm. So would the siblings be able to come together on management, or would it maybe make more sense to pass the 50 acres to one of your children and then compensate the other 4 children in another way? And that could be an option. So fair is really about considering the ability of the farm to produce in the future. So there are distinct ways to think about this, and it really depends on what your specific situation is. And so then lastly, I wanted to just mention agricultural conservation easements. They're discussed in the workbook, and you can think of them in certain circumstances as a potential tool for land transfer. An agricultural conservation easement is a deed restriction that ensures land stays open and available for farming forever. There are also forest land easements as well. Under a conservation easement, depending on the way it's written, it can allow the landowner to continue to farm the land or to continue to harvest timber, again, depending on how it's written, while placing some limitations. So typical limitations include limiting subdivision, either outright prohibiting it or limiting it into certain circumstances, limiting or removing the remaining development potential for houses. Sometimes you can have a reserve right where there's another house allowed to be built in the future. It really just depends on your specific situation. Typically, they will limit impervious surface. And often, landowners are compensated for what they agree to give up through a cash payment. Landowners can also donate conservation easements, which may have some tax benefits. But typically, agricultural conservation easements, at least in my experience, are purchased easements where the landowner receives that cash payment via escrow. And the way that agricultural conservation easements can be a tool for land transfer is that by removing that speculative development potential, they make the land more affordable for the next generation, while allowing the existing landowner, the current generation, to receive the full value of their property. And then lastly, if you're thinking about agricultural conservation easements, I'm happy to have another conversation outside of this or to connect you with resources if there's questions later. But to work through this process, you need to very early on identify a conservation entity that would be willing to hold that conservation easement. So that may be state or local government or a land trust. So that's something you work in partnership on. So I think with that, I have some additional resources on this slide. So you can go to the Conservation Commission's website with the Office of Farmland Preservation page. And then there's specifically a section on transition planning. And if you scroll down to the bottom of the screen, once you're there, there's those 4 tabs across the bottom, and you can click on each tab and the new resources will come up. So these are resources that we've gathered from other sources and have made available that we think might be helpful for folks looking at estate planning, succession planning, or business planning. So if you click on each tab, there's different resources. And so I encourage you to check that out later. And then this last slide is just that disclaimer that I shared early on in the presentation of the information in the workbook, and the information from my presentation today is really intended to just be educational. It's definitely should not be construed as legal advice or substitute for legal services or financial advice. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I don't think I've seen anything come through the chat yet.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kate. If anybody has questions, particularly on Kate's presentation or any of those resources that she shared, feel free to put it in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask directly. We can do that too. We've got a nimble group here this evening. I think we can just, I'll unmute and ask that way if you want, or feel free to put it in the chat. Okay, well, just that's always an option for you. If you're putting your question together, just let us know either by raising your hand or in the chat. But we can also move on to our panel discussion too. And I think Tova's going to introduce our panelists.
Yeah. All right. Well, yes, thanks so much, Kate, for all of that information and the online resource. It's going to be a tool that I think a lot of folks can access and use, already have, I'm sure, but hopefully tonight and beyond tonight, we can share that tool even wider to folks. So what we have planned now is some time to discuss these issues more and answer any other additional questions with our panel. We have several experts here in farmland protection and succession planning. So I want to go ahead and introduce them. Be thinking about your questions, maybe particular to your own situation, and these folks are here to help us out with those. So Sarah Sullivan is the Executive Director of Gorge Grown Food Network, and she serves as chair of the Columbia Gorge Food Security Coalition's Farmland Preservation and Land Access Working Group. Nate Ulrich is Columbia Land Trust East Cascades Conservation Lead. He develops and implements farm, forest, and habitat conservation priorities for our region, including both land acquisition and conservation easement transactions. Columbia Land Trust has completed multiple agricultural easements over the last 20 years, primarily in Trout Lake, Washington. Michael Walker is an attorney with Samuels Galen Cantor LLP, who specializes in succession planning. He has a JD from Northwestern School of Law and over 30 years of experience advising businesses and individuals in a broad range of business, tax, and estate planning issues. Michael is licensed to practice law in both Oregon and Washington and serves on a number of nonprofit boards and committees in the region. So we thank all our panelists for taking the time to be with us tonight. And could each panelist please describe their organization briefly and what they offer landowners in farming or the process of succession planning? We can start with Sarah.
Yeah, hi, good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here. This is a subject that is kind of near and dear to my heart. I grew up around my family's fourth generation apple orchard in Peru, New York, and know what it's like to climb into a tree with apples grafted onto that tree by my great grandfather. So I work for Gorge Grown Food Network, as Tova said, and our mission is to build a resilient and inclusive regional food system that improves the health and well-being of our community. And our approach is multi-pronged. We have lots of different programs. You've probably heard of us through our management of several farmers markets in the area, the Hood River Farmers Market, the White Salmon Farmers Market, and others. So our goal is to increase the supply of local food, and we do that in many ways by supporting local producers and gatherers, by bolstering markets and business development. We provide technical assistance and peer-to-peer learning opportunities. And then we broker relationships between institutional buyers, farmers, fishermen, chefs, schools, etc. We're also committed to ensuring that people have equal access to quality food through several food access programs. And that includes our mobile farmers market and our VeggieRx program, which enables healthcare providers to prescribe fruits and vegetables to food insecure residents. And lastly, we try to empower and mobilize people and groups by working with key organizations, including our Food Security Coalition, which is 40 different partners that come together to address food system issues. And as Tova said, one of the goals of that coalition is farmland preservation and access. And we really got involved in the work in 2018 when Portland State University published a report about the rise in the cost of farmland in Oregon, which affirmed that the gorge has some of the most vulnerable farmland in the state. And in fact, Hood River has the most expensive farmland now in the state of Oregon. And then I wanted to do a little deeper digging. So I wrote an article about this in Savor the Gorge magazine, and I'll put the link in the chat here, but just in case you want to learn more about the big picture of farmland loss in the gorge. So one silver lining to the pandemic was that we were able to form a bi-state group that meets virtually by Zoom quarterly, with some of the lead organizations working on this issue all around the Pacific Northwest. And that includes Thousand Friends of Oregon, Washington Farmland Trust, Oregon Agricultural Trust, Kate and the Washington State Conservation Commission, Nate here with Columbia Land Trust, Tova, and about 15 other organizations. So in that realm, we are really trying to find alignment among agencies to support folks like you and others that are either seeking to preserve farmland or find farmland. Beyond that, we do offer technical assistance to farmers and land seekers. For example, we've connected farmers with mediation services through Six Rivers and Hood River, which is a great resource. And then we've held other workshops in succession planning. We're also really open to partnering with our friends like Underwood Conservation District if there's a specific type of workshop that you're interested in. And then we also host crop talks in partnership with Underwood Conservation District and Oregon State University. That's where farmers get together and visit each other's farm. And as you know, that is sometimes the best way to learn everything from repairing a tool to the complexity of passing land on gracefully to the next generation. So if you'd like to learn more, you can sign up for our Gorge Grown Food Network newsletter on our homepage there. And thanks, Tova, just put the website in the chat. And we also have producer listservs where we broadcast resources and events and even funding opportunities. And then lastly, on our website, we have a classified section. And occasionally people do post land that they are seeking to sell or find stewards for, like long-term leases, or sometimes people that are seeking to steward some land are on there. So happy to be here and answer any questions.
Great, thanks for that overview. Okay, Nate, could you go ahead and introduce yourself and what your group does in the Gorge?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So Columbia Land Trust is a regional land trust. That means essentially we're like a nature conservancy, except we work at a local scale. So we were founded in Vancouver back in 1990. We've been around for over 30 years now working in this region. We work from about the Rock Creek watershed in central Klickitat County out to the mouth of the Columbia River. And we have a field office in Hood River where I'm based out of. And in those 30 years, we've conserved about 55,000 acres. Most of that is habitat land along rivers and forests. But we've also helped to conserve about 20,000 acres of farmland through conservation easements. Forest land through conservation easements. And like I said earlier, about 600 acres of farmland through conservation easements. And the entirety of that to date is up in Trout Lake. So I think the resources that we can provide are, one, we're an entity that legally is able to hold a conservation easement. Sometimes we have capacity to do fundraising for those easements in the same way that the Conservation Commission can. We're eligible to seek state funding for programs that fund easements and hold them. So we have staff that monitor easements, and probably the most helpful thing I think we can sometimes do is provide examples of what easements look like in our local backyard. At a bigger scale, we've also helped to incubate and start the Oregon Agricultural Trust, which is a farmland-focused land trust in Oregon. Not relevant to everybody here, but hopefully they'll be able to be successful in Hood River in the coming years, and we can have some more local examples of what farm conservation easements look like. That's what I got.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nate. And then we have Michael Walker. Could you go ahead and introduce yourself too? Thanks.
Thanks, Tova, and good evening, everyone. I'm Michael Walker. I am attorney with the law firm of Samuels, Yoel, and Cantor. We're a firm that's 95 years old this year. We have offices in Portland, Lake Oswego, Vancouver, and just across the river there in Hood River. One of our partners, Steve Seymour, is our resident partner there in Hood River, and I do make it out there, whenever we have a client meeting to connect with clients. So we're a diverse law firm of 19 attorneys, good practice areas that serve business owners. We certainly have agricultural clients that are under what I'd classify as business owners. My specific practice, my own practice, is in business and estate planning. And so I like to say that the sweet spot between those areas is business succession planning. And that involves, all the legal documents, both on the business side and on the estate planning side, that need to come into the mix, but also the tax planning, estate tax planning, income tax planning that we do for clients. Often we're doing tax planning in conjunction with the client's CPA. Also, personal background, I grew up on a farm and ranching family business in Idaho. And it was in our family since the 1870s. And so I'm familiar with not only, the sense of what a family business is like, the dynamics, the good and the bad, but also just the challenges of being in agriculture, operating a farm, and the challenges, but also, the wonderful benefits of, certainly growing up on a farm is great, but the benefits and connection you get with the land and the livestock, watching everything grow, it was an amazing place to grow up. And, I can, if we get into more succession planning discussion, we can, talk about maybe where my family's situation went. Suffice to say, that operation didn't make it into the third generation. As Kate was talking about that, it's like, we made it to the second generation, and the third generation grew up on our farm. But the succession plan, I think it gets harder and harder as you go down the line, and the operation gets maybe spread further over family members. So with that, certainly welcome your questions as they come up tonight.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for those introductions. And I'm going to let Jan take it away with any questions. We do have a few prompts ourselves if there's no audience questions, but go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, well, thank you all panelists for being here tonight. And I do have a couple of questions to get us started, but I just want to re-invite folks to either unmute themselves and just ask questions directly, or to put them in the chat, and we can certainly read those off for you if you've got stuff on your mind here. So I guess my first question I have here is, as folks are thinking about this process of succession planning, those of you that have been helping folks through this process, what's the most common mistake that you see landowners making as they work through this process of succession planning? And I'll just leave it up to our panelists if that feels like something near and dear that you could ask or answer for us.
I'll just reiterate what Kate Delavan said earlier, and I think it's generally waiting too long. Sometimes these processes can take, just to wrap your mind around them, they can take years, but legally they can also take years, or with a conservation easement specifically, it can take many years to develop the funding for it, 2, 3, 4 years, depending on kind of funders cycles and basically the pipeline of projects that are already in place. So I think the sooner these conversations happen, the more options it creates. It takes pressure off of the decision-making process, and it just leads to better outcomes. That's probably the first one that pops in mind for me.
I would certainly agree with Nate there. Waiting too long, because oftentimes if you wait too long, the options that you might have had years earlier are just no longer available. And you may be forced into a decision that you don't particularly like if you wait too long. The reality is that, whatever business we're in, and specifically looking at your farming business, it's one-to-one. You will leave your business at some point. The question is, on whose terms are you going to leave your business? Is that good financially? Is it good for your family? Is it good for the legacy that you want to leave? All of those things. I certainly would commend the workbook that Kate referred to. I look through that. There's really a lot of good material in there if you're just getting started in this process. A lot of good questions to think about as you go through that. Probably a quick second to start early is, what's your plan B? Because sometimes you have sort of a plan that you think, well, here's what I'm going to do. But okay, what if you become disabled, incapacitated? What if you die sooner than you were thinking you were going to in your natural lifespan? What's your plan B? What's going to happen to your farm at that point in time? And so, you certainly want to talk about plan A, but what's plan B if things don't always go the way that you expect? So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo that, and would also say, I think it's important to not underestimate how valuable and helpful a professional mediation could be, especially if there's any kind of underlying tension already. But even if there's not, I think some people are kind of adverse to anything that sounds like counseling or therapy, but a mediator just holds a neutral space for the family to have kind of a more professional conversation. And then I also see some tension, especially, in some of the more traditional agriculture of the area. And I can relate from my family's farm of 4 generations of attachment and love to apples. And we're in a changing world, right? And so I think that those that are transitioning out of their farms can and should be open to other ideas from their successors or either family or not. So I see some tension around that in the orchard industry in particular, when the next generation wants to do something different. And we want to honor tradition, right? But also innovation.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. We heard from Kate on some of the statistics around the loss of farm and forest land around the state and in the nation, but I'm wondering if some of the local folks on the call want to speak to what they think the biggest threat to our open working landscape, particularly here in the gorge, is. And that certainly our panelists, but also if you are a farmer on the line too, then if you have ideas on that, we'd welcome your ideas as well. Nate or Sarah, do you guys want to jump in on what you think the biggest threat is for our space particularly?
I think Sarah hit on that in her opening discussion. We have very high land values around here for generally non-resource uses. What's pushing those prices up is the conversion to residential uses, which generally has a higher land value. Oftentimes parcels get smaller, you have more competition for those parcels and the price goes up. And sometimes, for some landowners, that's kind of a retirement strategy. and but sometimes not. Sometimes that's a threat to their strategy of keeping their land together. But certainly because it's such a beautiful area, because it's proximal to a very large urban area, it's popular for recreation and retirement. I mean, I don't think I'm telling anybody anything new here, but that high price of land makes conservation or continued resource uses very difficult in this region. We can get a lot more done as a land trust in other regions where land prices are lower. We can work much more fluidly with landowners on conservation, where we don't have to fight for limited resources. We can do more acres with less money there.
Yeah, I want to share a couple things in the chat. One is a really great comprehensive report that 1,000 Friends of Oregon put together, and it's called Death by 1,000 Cuts. And it's a grim tale about the loss of farmland in Oregon, but it does lay out this really great 10-point plan to protect Oregon's farmland. And I think it's relevant for landowners to read as well, and applicable in Washington. So you might check that out. And then I really love this guide too that was created called The Guide to Cultivating Resilience. And this is specifically for farmers. Oops, that's not the link, but I'll put the link in there in a moment. And that's, addressing a lot of the things that we're seeing more around drought and fire and smoke. And, a lot of you have probably lived here a lot longer than I have, but even in my 8 years in the gorge, we've seen quite the change around that. So I worry about how that affects succession planning, and when the water is available half the time that it was 5 years ago. I mean, those are things that we need to think about, in business plans, and also what is the value of farmland for future generations.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess Tova's still on the question about protecting lands from future development. Certainly, conservation easements, talk to Nate, they certainly have a place in the mix here. And, so definitely worth investigation if that's the right fit for your situation. I think also having a good succession plan. I mean, that's sort of the whole point of tonight's discussion. And without that sounding too much like a platitude, if you have a succession plan where you're putting your successor in the best position to be economically successful, then they're more likely to stay on the land, continue its operations, keeping it in agriculture. And so a good succession plan can actually contribute to the success of the operation into the next generation. So, it's worth taking seriously, not only for your own situation, but, that attachment to the land and wanting to keep it in farmland and not, shopping malls, whatever development. It's important to think about the economic success of the next generation, so they have the best opportunity to continue the operation.
Yeah, thank you. And along those lines, we had kind of brainstorming another question, and maybe this is best posed to you, Michael, but what tax advantages are associated with land succession that could be or should be considered in advance? Do you have any?
Well, certainly, one of the challenges for property owners is that you have the estate tax. Now the exemption right now on the federal level is 12.06 million. State of Washington, it has an exemption of 2.193 million here in 2022. That changes every year. Oregon, across the river, has a $1 million exemption. And so just looking at that kind of potential burden, often landowners are land rich and cash poor. And so taking into account, the potential estate tax exposure, if someone, when the owner dies, what's that bill going to be? How is it going to be paid? And certainly part of the succession plan is looking at that estate tax issue, and particularly if you want to keep it in the family, there are a few provisions of the tax code that benefit family businesses, but at the end of the day, there's still estate tax to be paid, even if you're below the high federal exemption. When you start adding all your assets together, particularly if you're a landowner, to get over the Washington exemption, some folks are surprised when they add all their assets together and really look at the value of their land, the value of their farming operation, how much it does add up to, even though, you look at your bank account and, maybe you don't feel particularly wealthy. The value of that land can, particularly in this kind of a market where property values have gone up so much, it can really catch up on you. And so, looking at the estate tax and the potential bill, I think is one issue that folks ought to look at very carefully, where they are. And, values keep going up, which means that potential estate tax bill keeps going up.
Other thoughts on that or questions?
I can. So one of the conservation easements, and by the way, I'm a one-trick pony. I'm talking about conservation easements because that's what we do. So good thing we're a well-balanced team here. But when it comes to funding conservation easements, as Kate mentioned, there are some federal and state funding programs. They're very competitive. They're difficult to access at times. It means like here in the Gorge, we have to compete against projects that are in Whatcom County or anywhere else in the state, King County, and there's only a set amount of funding every few years for those. But there's always available federal income tax deductions that can help offset the cost, or I should say, through a tax deduction, you can offset the cost of the donation of an easement. So folks can donate an easement to a land trust or to, again, a qualifying public entity like the Washington Conservation Commission, and deduct, if it's farmland, a much higher amount than, or say, habitat land. There's a real incentive for farmland. And I want to say, Michael, you could totally correct me here. I want to say it's 100% of the value of the easement over about 15 years. So say, for example, the easement is worth $100,000. If your income in a given year is closer to $50,000, you can take 50 deduction against $50,000 of income in 1 year, and then the other 50,000 in the following year. Again, Michael, please correct that as I've stated it, but there's a really good incentive for farmland conservation.
I think all that is accurate, Nate. What I would add to there is make sure that in looking at donation of a conservation easement, you dot your I's and cross your T's, and particularly the appraisal of what you're donating. There's some very particular rules in the tax code and the regulations in terms of valuation and reporting your donation in a very particular way. So you definitely want to think through the whole process and what's required from a tax compliance standpoint before you jump into really going forward with that. So valuation is a very important issue, and as I read various tax publications, you see some cases where people have really, failure to adequately value or do an adequate appraisal. They've gotten hammered with some pretty nasty penalties if they don't do it right. So it's a great opportunity, but be cautious about how you go about it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Oh, sorry, Marlene, I see your hand there. I want to add one thing to that, which is that it's expensive to do that kind of appraisal up front, and you definitely want to have a good legal representation in advance to guide you through that process and make sure you're not making any of the mistakes that you was mentioning. So even though there is a significant federal income tax deduction benefit, there are cash upfront costs to that approach into doing it right. Sorry, Marlene, I saw you had a question there.
That's okay. We were wondering if there are ownership options within the family that then you don't have the same estate tax liability.
Well, hi, Marlene. That's probably one I can take. There are a lot of options. When we have a family business, oftentimes, particularly if it involves real estate, we may have the real estate in one entity, probably an LLC, and maybe the operations of the farm in a separate entity with a lease between the two. So, with two entities over time, if you have a succession plan where part of what you're doing is doing smaller gifts over a long period of time. So you take those entity interests. Now, the current federal gift tax exclusion is $16,000 per recipient of a gift. So if you have a child that you want to gift something to, and there's two of you, each of you can give that child value worth $16,000. So oftentimes with business entities where you're giving minority interest, we talk to folks about the potential for valuation discounts where we're giving those small little interests over time that the small little interest can be discounted for valuation purposes. So, 16,000 of an LLC interest is probably worth more when you look at its share of the underlying business assets. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, but again, we come back to that, that first principle that Kate made is, there's lots of options. If you start early and over a long period of time, a gifting program where you're moving assets down to the next generation can really mitigate the potential estate tax hit down the road. It also brings that next generation into the ownership mix. They have some skin in the game, and they have some potential economic motivation to cause the business to continue to be successful. So, certainly all of this, I think it starts with having a good team effort, an attorney, a CPA, maybe a financial advisor, maybe an insurance person. I don't want to get too technical here, but we do come back to that principle, plan early, plan often.
Other thoughts or questions on that, or anything else that's come up for you as you're listening to all this good detailed information? A lot to absorb, I know, but
Well, this is your chance. While we have these experts here at our fingertips, we can take advantage of the moment. Any other thoughts or questions at the top of your head? Presenters, panelists, feel free to chime in with any other points you wanted to make sure to make tonight.
Just say. It's Marlene again. So it just seems like the first thing to do is to go through the workbook and to do that planning before reaching out to the advisors, like the legal and financial advisors, to have that work done first. Is that kind of your recommendation?
Can maybe jump in first and then others can chime in if they'd like. I'd say the workbook is a great place to start. I don't know that you have to work through every single page in the workbook though before you start to assemble your team of advisors. The workbook is really designed to be something you can pick up, work on certain sections, and then maybe set back down and come back to it. So it's not something that you need to do necessarily. I mean, you can if this is your preference, but you don't necessarily need to do it cover to cover. It's more like you pick pieces up when you're ready to have those conversations with family members or business partners, and having reading through it first to gain familiarity, and particularly reviewing the section on the team of professional advisors who to have on your team would be helpful as you start to engage with those folks. So by no means do you have to read every word before you can start the next step. It's really there to be a resource as you continue along in the journey. So I'm curious to hear if anyone has anything else to add to that.
I would add, I think that this section of the workbook dealing with goals and objectives are really important. Because if I sit down with a client talking about something like this, I don't have their goals and objectives. They need to really have thought through what they really want to do. What's your plan A? What terms do you plan to leave the business? But let's talk about plan B as well. Thinking through, at least on a basic level, what those goals and objectives are. I think is essential before, so in your own mind, what do I really want? And then, I think if you have a good sense of that, you can certainly get started with, whatever advisor you feel comfortable with. Because our job is to sit down with folks and say, okay, here's your goals, your objectives, your dreams, your intended legacy. Let's make that happen.
yeah, go ahead, John.
Hi, I fell over. I'm just asking a question regarding conservation easements and impact of development in the area, because my parents are Marlene and Thomas, and we're facing a lot of impacts of landowners or attempts to develop land that are nearby, and they're using easements that we have as a family to access their land. And I don't know if there's anyone that we could talk to about protecting the integrity of our land from development of people who are trying to use easements that are already existing that were for timber, and now they want to use them for development of resorts or subdivisions and other things. Is there any kind of expertise that someone has about that. I don't know if that's necessarily what would be a conservation easement because it's more of an access easement, but we want to protect the integrity of all of our lands, and it seems like the encroachment is the biggest issue in the area that we live in.
Yeah, you got that right, that there's a difference. Conservation easement is not the same thing as an access easement. It sounds like what you have is an access easement issue. And in that case, definitely want to talk with an attorney or somebody who can help you to understand the easements that exist in place over your land. And sometimes there are limitations on the use of those easements. Sometimes they are specifically for timber, for a natural resource land management use. And they may exclude a residential use, or they may not be able to be transferred. For example, it might be for one entity at a particular point in time, or so they couldn't be split off. But you'd want to work with an attorney or a title company to initially get access to those, to do some review and get a better handle on it.
I would echo Nick's point about a title company. For a few $100s, you can have a title company do a title report, look at anything that's an easement, an encumbrance, any sort of restriction that currently exists on your land. So it doesn't take very much to get those documents. And certainly if a person needs legal help in interpreting, well, what's this mean? It's 20 pages long, and it seems like it's written in a foreign language. So, if you need help on that level, then you'd be talking to an attorney to interpret what's there. But, the starting point is to get a good title report to see, what's been placed on the title to start with, and go from there.
And I'll add to that, if you do go down that path, to make sure when you get that title report that they include the underlying documents behind each exception, is what they're called, and then you actually read that underlying document if you can. Sometimes they're documents that were written by hand 100 years ago and then scanned many times, and they're difficult to read, but try to get that actual underlying document so that you can read it word for word. And figure out what it's really saying. And then if you're, having trouble with that, that's where an attorney can really be helpful in helping you understand that. These aren't always the easiest things to read, but they will clarify some of those things that Nate mentioned around, well, what's the actual allowed use for this access easement? Maybe it's limited, and you'll find that in the underlying document that the title company should be able to pull for you.
Great, thank you. Good question. Any other questions for any of our panelists? What did we not ask you that you were hoping somebody would ask? Make sure we get everything out there to folks. Quiet bunch. Everyone's dreaming of their dinners.
Yeah, we don't have to hold on to you all for too long. I feel like the panelists and presenters here tonight are such wealths of expertise, and just this is so valuable to hear your advice. And luckily, we'll post this recording for future use. So again, if anyone here knows a neighbor or a family member or anyone who needs this information, please refer them to our website, and just in a few days, we'll have this recording posted and available for viewing into the future. So yeah, last call. We're probably going to wrap it up here unless there's any other last minute burning issues to cover. Okay.
I'll just share one more resource, Tova, in the chat here. It's just the website called farmtofarmer.org. And it's sort of a matchmaker for those that are seeking land and those that are hoping to either pass land on or offer long-term leases or have someone steward their land if you don't have someone within the family. And there's a bunch of great tools on this website too that are very Washington specific. So just in case there's anyone here who's thinking about trying to find someone outside the family, that's a really great resource. And often we get inquiries from both farmers that want to come and steward land in the gorge and those that don't have any heirs. I'll never forget a sweet handwritten letter I got from an older couple in Hood River that were just really wanting someone to continue the legacy of their farm. So if anyone ever wants to just reach out one-on-one to me, I'm happy to chat, and I'll put my email in the chat here, and just wish you all the best.
Thank you. That's a great resource. Yeah.
And I'll be posting, along with the video of this presentation tonight, I'll be posting Kate's slides for everyone and all of these links and different resources that would been in the chat too. So that'll all be together on the website. You can find those again.
Okay. Well, with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. I just want to really thank everyone again for being here tonight, for so much information that was shared by Kate and our panelists, Sarah, Nate, and Michael. So thank you again and again for your time and sharing of your knowledge. And I think we all learned something new about succession planning tonight and the many resources available to landowners. Jan is going to put up one more poll. Let's see if, I don't think you need to share your screen to do that, but I'm going to share mine. You'll see our contact information on the screen, and feel free to reach back to us again if there's follow-up questions, and we can get you in touch with the appropriate people as needed. If you can fill out that poll, it's just a quick survey about our workshop. And again, this was the last of our winter workshop series. We pushed the envelope on that winter season there. And again, we had a great season of workshops, and we'll plan another series for next year. But in the meantime, of course, keep a lookout for other Underwood Conservation District events. We won't be going dormant over the spring and summer here. As Sarah mentioned, there are the crop talks coming up that are getting planned now. So keep a lookout for future events. Again, reach out to us for any follow-up questions. And thank you again for joining us this evening. We hope to see you soon. Until then, until the next time, stay well and good night.